So I believe under like a like a post-scarcity economy or something close to it, like socialism would be trivially easy and effective and insanely effective. Um, Broadly speaking, however, I am skeptical of revolutionary changes to such massive and complex systems. Um, I'd say my main opposition to socialism is based more around a a belief in incrementalism than it is in
Right.
an opposition to the underlying principles.
So just to be clear, like if you are in favor of socialism,
I wouldn't say I'm in favor of
then
socialism, but I'm not
right.
hostile
Okay.
towards it.
Okay. I would say that so with this belief in like incrementalism, I would say that no real form of socialism can ever effectively take power without some sort of like revolutionary change because the structure of the government and legal system in like capitalist countries are designed in a way in order to like reinforce a capitalist economy, right? Like I don't know how you can what governmental mechanism you could in theory use to transition to socialism without revolutionary change. So if that's your contention, then I don't think there's really
Yeah,
any.
no,
Yeah. So
that's completely fair. I've heard
yeah,
from a lot of like socialists and just leftists in general that like
right,
incrementalism won't get you to your desired endpoint.
right.
But then my my worry about that is that they're basically gambling the livelihoods of, millions upon hundreds of millions of, hundreds of millions of people
Well, I'd say that like
on an
there's
idea that hasn't
okay.
been proven on scale.
I'd say that that's something that's sort of like we are gambling people's well-being, but like there are already people whose well-being aren't met under capitalism, and I'm sure that like the most vulnerable people who would be benefited the most from socialism are the people who are being killed by capitalism today by not having but there's something like 20 million people a year killed through malnourishment, dehydration, or lack of treatment for preventable diseases each year, and a lot of the most of those deaths aren't due to an actual scarcity, but due to it being just not profitable to provide these people with the resources that they
But
need to survive.
a lot of those issues could be almost entirely fixed under a roughly, I don't like the word capitalist, but a liberal, or something vaguely like liberalist framework, at least something that's not inherently inimical to capitalism.
I don't necessarily think that that's feasible because a lot of the reason these people are like in such rough conditions is because they live in the third world and they have no political power over the institutions that are extracting wealth from their nations. Like when we have like some of the roughest places in the world right now are places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is like their primary like their economy is primarily based around like things like extraction, which gets the raw materials are taken from them, they're shipped away, they see none of the benefits from them beyond the initial sale, and the governments of those countries are whenever those governments attempt to nationalize industry or to like orient themselves along more like liberal but more equitable liberal systems, U.S. foreign intervention, like just because the business interests have so much political power, will overthrow the regime that was like lawfully elected and install some U.S. puppet who continues the cruelties in these countries.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that that's a problem. I don't know how anyone couldn't agree that, but I'm not necessarily certain that a socialist system will be more liable to be able to resolve those issues. I mean, yeah, in an ideal world, of course, it would be more capable of resolving those issues.
Well, the
But
issue isn't something that needs to be resolved. The issue is U.S. interventionism, and the U.S. Can resolve that issue very easily by not intervening.
well, yeah, that's what I was talking about,
Yeah,
the relative ability of socialism to resolve the issue. And like you said, it could be resolved by the U.S. just not intervening, which
right.
can be achieved through a system, at least,
I
vaguely familiar with the current one.
It could, but when all of these like social democratic protections that you seem to be in favor of that like limit the power of corporations to do evil shit, all of these are given as none of these are legislations that none of these like regulations are legislation that a group of lawmakers meets and has like a spirited debate of what the most just legal solution to these problems are. These are all things that people like march in the streets over in order to achieve. Like any sort of regulation on business requires some sort of, if not like a total revolution, it still requires the same sort of revolutionary activities in order to move forward. I don't
Direct
think.
action,
Yeah, I don't.
direct action, if not revolution. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
would
I
I would
don't
agree
think
with that.
incrementalism is as bloodless as you seem to think it is.
Oh
Is the
no, it's
issue?
definitely not
Yeah,
not bloodless. I wouldn't
right,
say that.
right.
A lot of the games that I've had have been hard fought. Say that, and I think that's like, I don't know where I was
Okay,
going. Yeah,
go. Sorry, do you so you don't know where you're going with that? Well, I mean, I guess a big thing for me too is like even when we do win these concessions, that's what they are. They're concessions.
yeah,
Without changing the underlying structure of the economy, no matter how many regulations or sanctions are in place, there will always be a conflict where the very richest will seek to undermine and destroy these regulations, and they'll have
but that's
the political power in order to do so. Like we even see in like countries that have we see in many countries that have like social democratic systems that those over time those systems weaken due to influence from like the capitalist class.
yeah.
And
That's true. We do see that happening in a lot of the, at least the European countries, like Norway and,
yeah,
you know NHS defund the
and we
employees.
haven't seen a single example of one of these countries enacting legislation to benefit the third world
Um,
or to protect the third world from their own capitalist enterprises.
yeah, yeah. I broadly agree with that. I do think the international financial, a little bit like the World Bank, for example, National Monetary, a little bit too much hate. I, like that's not really good though.
Yeah, like even if
I guess
even if the IMF was providing like aid to these countries, which I'm very skeptical of the IMF and World Bank. But even if these were providing like completely harmless aid to these countries, they still wouldn't be protecting those countries from like corporate interests that seek
yeah,
to like
exactly.
right.
I think my main contention with the point you made, the underlying point that within a capitalist framework, the capitalists, the people with money, well, money is power, and they will use that
Not
power
necessarily
to.
money, because what I'm concerned about isn't real. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But what I'm concerned about isn't necessarily like dollars and cents. It's those people's control over economic institutions and their relationship with the means of production. Like, for example, let's say Jeff Bezos wasn't allowed to donate and it wasn't allowed to make any sort of donation, like monetary donation, to a candidate he would like to support. He still has an incredible amount of political power because he controls
Oh yeah,
like people.
for sure.
Yeah, and we can even see this like
I mean, just
beyond any.
look at how Amazon is causing the race to the bottom of, like, taxes and shit, and all of these
Right.
smaller communities.
Yeah, things like
Um,
that.
but that's I don't really like making this argument because it's played out, but that's something that's kind of inherent in, I'd say, at least in I don't want to say human nature, but I guess human nature as it applies to large complex societies. People in power, people with power will seek more power or seek to um, maintain the power they currently have. And like again, I don't really like doing this, but if you look at the like Soviet Union, for example, like that people that had power there. I mean, I know you're more
Right.
like anarcho syndicalist, right?
I consider I used to use the syndicalist label, but I don't anymore because I'm sort of like I'm very skeptical of markets in general, and I know you're gonna hate that, but I'm
To
skeptical
the
of
extent that I am socialist, I would be a market socialist.
yeah,
With the little I
I'm
know of it.
skeptical of markets because I feel that a lot of these, and I don't know if I am capable of getting into like this economic, like a specific economic debate with you and looking like I know what I'm talking about. But
I mean, to be fair,
um,
I wouldn't really know what I'm talking about either.
but
It's up to the people who actually.
so a big part of why I'm skeptical about markets is I think that a lot of these same pressures that I think are endemic to capitalism will be self-imposed by like workers will vote to exploit themselves in order to remain competitive in a market, even if that's not the solution that leads to like human happiness, and that's sort of why I'm skeptical of them. I mean I think market socialism is better than what we have today, but I'm still skeptical of it. This
I
liberal just
guess,
discovered anarchism in real time. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to reach that.
yeah. I
So yeah, I
consider.
guess what I'd
I,
say is I agree with you that when people are given positions of power, they do seek to, even if they have really good intentions, they'll use that platform of power in order by using that platform of power, they legitimize and expand the powers granted to them by that structure. And those sort of like institutional hierarchies are a big part of why I'm anarchist. Like I don't believe that like for example, you can see when Kamala Harris was DA in California, she did like a bunch of things like criminalizing truancy, things that seem like, oh, she did them in order to achieve this goal of like lowering truancy rates. Well, that's true, but the tools that she had at her disposal in order to do that aren't really ethical to use. Like the power that she had to affect that sort of system was one that would lead to a lot of hardship, even if like the intention was to enact something that's more just. So I'd say that like a big part of anarchist theory is justifying like the power you're using in order to avoid that sort of situation where like power consolidates at the top because people use it well-meaningly, and then that creates an institution that can be used for more nefarious purposes or that incidentally causes people pain.
well, I guess this is fact.
Sorry, you're
Well,
cutting out a little bit.
I moved a little bit further away from my phone. So this kind of gets back to the incrementalism thing.
Right.
Again, we don't have an example of a large, modern industrialized country that's been capable of practicing anything vaguely resembling anarchy or anarchy.
Well, that's
There's
mostly
the
true.
rebel Zapdos, I guess, but that's like a
Zapatistas, yeah.
agricultural. Yeah, that's like an agricultural community with like less than 0.01% of the U.S.
That's true.
But
And I don't so that's a valid concern. What I'd say is like what anarchists need to work towards before like overthrowing the current system is to like I'm a big fan of prefigurative politics, which is an anarchist tactic that involves basically it asserts that in order to organize along anarchist lines, not only do you need to be concerned with like the destructive aspects of the revolution, like destroying the state and seizing that sort of state power and distributing it among the people. But you also need to, like, before doing that, you need to have institutions in place so that that power can be like, like you can build these things called dual power structures, which are essentially like things that operate outside of state authority but fulfill a lot of the same roles that the state does today. And by doing
So,
those, by constructing those, we can have like some sort of framework that we can slot in as we as the revolution continues.
Um, yeah, I mean that definitely makes a lot of sense. But at some point you're gonna have to, get rid of the state if you're not
Yeah.
essentially creating a state anew or a different state, and that point is where I believe the biggest possible danger.
Sure.
You don't know how it's gonna turn out,
Sure.
and we
Yeah.
do know for sure that the evils can be mitigated, and we also know that there are a lot of positives, even they're arguably outweighed by the negative.
I don't necessarily know that the negatives of like the capitalist economy can be successfully mitigated, because this goes back to like that. Well, we do see like some social democratic reforms that do mitigate powers, but I don't necessarily believe that it's possible to construct those in a way that like actually guarantees people's rights in the way that I think needs to be done. I think though,
I
since
don't think
the
any
fact.
system can really guarantee people's rights because it still depends on people, and people aren't,
Sure, but I think
consistent.
so. This is why I think capitalism is uniquely ill-equipped to deal with that. Capitalism incentivizes humans to like. There's a direct incentive under capitalism to violate others' human rights, whereas under like some sort of more an economic system that values cooperation over competition, that becomes there's less of a like what I this maybe goes back to what I believe in human nature. I don't necessarily believe in the idea of human nature beyond humans respond to biological needs and external stressors, which is fairly uncontroversial that those two things are part of human nature. But
Right.
so I believe that like by creating some sort of system that incentivizes, like if people act in their own self-interest for certain things, um, we can create an environment where acting in one's self-interest involves cooperating with others rather than competition and attempting to suppress others' human rights as it does now. Like a lot of the problems with capitalism come down to, well, it's you're incentivized to act in a way that's immoral, and that sort of incentive is constantly battling with the incentive to do what is moral. And by that sort of like contradiction is something that I think needs to be addressed in order to uh at least make a much better step towards guaranteeing people's rights. And you're right, an anarchist state could absolutely fail, or an anarchist government could absolutely fail. Probably shouldn't say state. But that's sort of like um it's I don't want to say that's a risk I'm willing to take, but that's a risk that I think needs to be
It has
taken if we
to be
want
taken.
to
Yeah.
if we want to move forward from like having a constant struggle to make sure everyone's like human rights are addressed.
Um. So I've lost. Um. I keep trying to move my phone out of the way. That's not good. Um. So I guess could you kind of like give me a Cliff Notes version of what you just said again?
Sorry, what
Like
was.
that essentially that. So you're basically saying that capitalism inherently incentivizes
Yeah, so like a lot
human
of
rights.
like the exploitation, like for example the issues I brought up, like exploitation of the third world, workers rights under social democratic states being rolled back. These are all things that are and I haven't mentioned this, but the obvious one, which is the total destruction of the planet's environment. These are all specific things that are incentivized by capital, and specifically by the profit motive under capital. So like whenever there's any sort of externality, like being a moral person, it's not necessarily the fault of any individual capitalist, but any capitalist that doesn't, to the full extent available to them, exploit these externalities in order to make a profit, they will be outcompeted, and from there, a more ruthless capitalist will take over and will will exploit like a lack of enforcement of human rights regulations, or a the polluting the environment, or attempting to subvert the legal system in order to cut down on labor costs. Things like that are like, even if every individual capitalist doesn't like those things and is well intentioned and
Right.
wants to avoid them, they have to engage in those things in order to avoid being outcompeted by the next guy who is willing to do them.
Yeah, of course. It's
Yeah,
like a classic, market failure stuff.
right.
You can.
And I think that a lot of these market failures, like, while they can be addressed by the state, I don't think they can be addressed in a way that, because they, this sort of state power, um like, there will be, and end up being a constant conflict between the state's regulations and the market's desire to remove those regulations. And I don't see how, when we have a system where the entire economy is under the control of the people who own massive corporations, I don't see how the government could win that conflict long term. I think there's an inherent instability to that.
Um, yeah, I would agree. Like that's a issue. The basically that I would say effectively ethical capitalism essentially requires a ongoing war between bureaucrats, capitalists, and the bureaucrats have to win in order for it to be ethical. Something approximating it.
Right.
And that is a problem. That's like a fairly mainstream position within a lot of circles. So like I broadly agree with your diagnosis of like the issues in capitalism. Um, my I say broadly because like if you do like again I kind of hate this argument, but I know like Marx. I haven't that or anything.
Sorry, you're still cutting out a
Uh,
little bit. I just want to make sure.
Sorry. Yeah. So like I haven't read Das Kapital or anything. And I'm fairly certain communism and socialism are supposed to be an evolution from a capitalist society. That's correct, right?
So Marx didn't really, in a lot. I mean, most of, like, specifically Marx's writing, he didn't necessarily make any prescriptive claims about what exactly we should do once we move beyond capitalism. He called it an evolution of capitalism because he said, I think his Marx's position was that under the material conditions of capitalism, you can't make a fair assessment of what the next form of government should look like, and we have to make those decisions once we've, like, moved beyond capitalism. Similar to a lot of ways, like a lot of how liberalism took over from, like, monarchy in Europe. Like, there wasn't necessarily like a plan to on how exactly we would make everything how exactly we would implement liberalism and how exactly that sort of system would function before we overthrew the monarchs. We sort of did it, and that's when the material conditions of things progressed to the point where we could make decisions of how do we run a liberal democracy. So it's sort of a similar concept there.
Hmm. That's actually kind of a good example.
But I'm not an
Because
expert
like
on Marx
even
either, so
even
that's
even when
if you ask an Orthodox
when
Marxist about it, they might have a different take than I do.
oh yeah, and of course leftism is much more expansive than just Marxism in particular. But
Right.
I would say that example about the move from monarchy was good. I'm not exactly sure
Sorry, you're
because like
still cutting out.
even in like England, for example, like they still have monarchs, but that required sort of force for the Magna Carta to be signed and so on.
Yeah.
But that's still kind of like an incrementalist approach to getting rid of at least France definitely didn't have an incrementalist approach to the monarchy, at least not.
Well, yeah, like the idea is that
Actually, sure.
when you like, there's if you
Hmm?
Rosa Luxemburg writes a lot about this, and a lot of what she writes down is like, a lot of Rosa Luxemburg's writings are focused on, like, this question of, like, reformism versus revolution. And the idea is that the and I think you already agreed to mostly what I'm saying here, is that the policies of one government are written in order to sustain that particular like mode of governance and mode of economic production. um and therefore like it's not a question of policy when we move, like when we have like drastic changes like these, we have to reorient things in order to support that. Like another example is I think the police as an institution right now can't be reformed into serving the needs that we need them to serve, because the institution has like such a long and lasting legacy of being shaped all around certain lines that in order to have like a just police, it needs to be completely reformed. And we can't necessarily fix it with policies, because the structures as policies are implemented within is inherently unjust.
Um,
I gotta go, comrades. I look forward to the VOD. All right, Hillbilly. I probably will put this on YouTube unless Sean minds.
yeah. I think I. Hey, you remember, just appropriate enough thing. You're speaking of YouTube.
Yeah, go
You
ahead.
remember that time we did?
Sorry, you're still cutting out. I can't hear that.
It was the race for the wool map on Minecraft back like 10 years ago or something
Yeah,
stupid
I
like
do
that.
remember that.
So I think one of the guys we were playing with, I'm trying to remember his name. Oh, he hasn't updated anything. Okay, I last checked a couple years ago, but one of the guys we were playing with, he had put it on YouTube and he got up to like 300,000 subscribers, which I thought was
Wow.
kind of.
What was his
It was
name?
Soul Wolf, SOL Wolf.
I don't know that.
Yeah, it was only 300,000. Anyways, fuck.
If
I
I'm
mean,
talking
okay,
like for too
so
long, I'm talking for big stretches of time because I'm not hearing anything, but might be cutting out. So if you need me to, if I'm like talking over you, just let me know. It's fine.
no, I'm trying to listen. I just
Yeah.
um. So yeah, I'm
Sorry.
trying to figure out how to phrase this. I'm much better at debating over text than
That's fair.
verbally. It gives me more time to think about what I'm going to say.
Yeah, take all the time you need.
And then refine it before I post it. But
Big Daddy Ass Play. Thank you for the follow.
a oh, can I redo my Twitch? Oh, okay, no, it's still Timber. Interesting. Thought it was. Um. So systems do seek to perpetuate them. They do whatever they perpetuate themselves. I guess my solution to the problems of capitalism would be like a robust culture around, you know, I guess direct action,
Well,
protesting, all that.
so if we have a robust culture where people are able to engage in direct action in order to like enact things, this is sort of what anarchism leads to, right? Like
Like,
a big part of anarchy is this goes into
okay, so
prefigured.
you just cut out.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Okay, so a big part of anarchy is the and prefigurative politics, as I was talking about earlier, is anarchism as a system. A lot of the goals of anarchism are to socialize and produce people who are capable of governing themselves in an anarchic way. And like a lot of anarchist theorists talk about how when we engage in like flat hierarchies, like anarchism, we socialize ourselves to gain like the sort of tools necessary in our own like analysis of our behaviors in order to self-perpetuate as an anarchist society, whereas participating in the society of a liberal democracy or under a vanguard party in a Marxist-Leninist sort of communist system, these don't give us the same sort of tools of analysis that we have under anarchism, because these are these same sort of these structures don't incentivize developing those tools in the same way that anarchism does. So that sort of like culture, I agree, is incredibly important and is necessary for any sort of government to maintain human rights. But those structures don't come out of nowhere. Like the cultural like will of the people is incredibly deeply tied to both their economic and political conditions, and we can't really get to a point where people are willing to like participate in that culture of direct action unless we have some sort of structure incentivizing it alongside them. And I don't really see capitalism being that structure that's required.
But didn't we have a lot of that culture in like I guess like the early 20th century, like the first half of the 20th century?
Yeah, we did, and
Where
then we instituted social democratic reforms, and we paid out a lot of people in order to abandon those causes. And then they continued throughout the '60s with like, throughout the '60s, a lot of white people were like, "Fuck you, I got mine," to the black community, which previously had solidarity with socialist movements. So we have groups like the Black Panthers, which were a Maoist group that primarily participated in like community defense and build like collective action, like, and the CIA came in and like there are a lot of Black Panther activists that were murdered by the CIA. Fred Hampton is a good example of that, or who were
yep,
like this like
yeah,
these
they had a whole dollop episode.
as soon as these people become a threat to capital, then this is where you see how infeasible these sort of reforms are. Because as long as capital is given that same sort of structural power, they're going to use it to preserve their own interests, and their power is uh, under this structure. They have drastically higher power than any citizen could have, and most political groups comprised of citizens could have, unless it's like an actual like mass movement. So
I
this
think
is where my skepticism comes from. Is like, yes, we can have like resistance to these capitalist groups, and those resistance movements have accomplished things in the past. But as long as the structure provides capital with that power, then and the power granted to them, I don't think is justified either in any sense of the word. It seems like um, we're doing things on their terms, or we're not doing things at all when it comes to
uh,
reformism under a capitalist system.
you cut out after the word
Oh, so it seems to me like because under a capitalist system we have a drastic systemically capitalists have this unjustified power over everyone else. When we attempt to engage in reformism under a capitalist system, we are doing things by the capitalist terms or not at all, until we actually actively seek out to like reject the things that they are providing to us.
Sorry, I'm just staying quiet because like I said,
Yeah, yeah, no,
uh,
take your time.
that's word my response.
And
Um,
if I'm talking over you, let me know. I just have a heart like I'm trying
oh
to
no, you haven't
I
been
sort of try
talking
to
very
fill dead
me.
air. So I don't want to
Um,
gish gallop you either, or just gish gallop, whatever the fuck.
yeah, yeah, that's fair. Um, so your basic position is, well, yeah, I'm already okay.
A big part of my
Thing,
position is I don't think revisionism is I think revisionism into like social democratic along social democratic lines is sort of it's doomed to fail in certain ways, and it's not necessarily avoiding a lot of the things that you seem to be associating negatively with with like revolutionary change. Um, that's I guess my big contention.
I just okay. So the thing is, I don't think that my counter to that would be that many of these same people, that the I guess maybe not the actual like super wealthy 0.01% capitalists themselves, but many of the high level professional class, um, who has benefit under capitalism, will try and hijack the revolution. Like if you look at I don't know, just the French Revolution, for example. A lot of the people who, I guess, spearheaded the revolution had like backgrounds as lawyers and essentially the bourgeoisie. I'm probably pronouncing it terribly
Bourgeoisie,
wrong. Bourgeoisie, yeah.
right?
Um, and that's why, like, if you look at, say, the Soviet Union, or a lot of other revolutionary countries make it a concentrated effort to purge those bourgeoisie classes, uh, upper middle class classes, essentially, precisely because uh, they're counter revolutionary, at least to some extent.
So it depends on with count with like threat of like counter revolution and things like that. I don't support like a lot of the purges that the USSR did, because like a lot of the USSR was like the situation there was something I absolutely think was abhorrent, especially because um they did things like they prosecuted gay people as LGBT people were prosecuted because being gay was seen as bourgeois decadence, and like that sort of shit is something I'm obviously not supportive of. There were a lot of legitimate examples, however, of people who were like when so under the current system, like we have a legal system that, the behavior in both the upper and lower classes is illegal. Only the lower classes are really treated as criminals, right? Like when let's look at an example, right? So today, if you're walking down the street and your wallet is stolen from you and you have $20 in your wallet, you can call the police. The police will hopefully find the pickpocket. They'll beat the pickpocket up, send him to jail, and you may or may not get your $20 back. Um, but if you're working, so you have the
Landlord
opportunity to
raised
enact
rent.
you have the opportunity to enact state violence on that enact state violence on that particular individual for that particular illegal action. That's something you have the right to do as a citizen. Is to have the state go in and enact violence on this person. Um,
Mhm.
what you can't do, however, is something that has the exact same material effect on you. Your employer docks $20 of pay from your paycheck, which you rightfully earned. This is illegal, but you cannot call the cops on your employer for this. It's not treated as a criminal action. It's treated as it's treated through like a civil court. Even though this has the exact same material effect on you, and this is drastically more common than having like money outright stolen from you. And this sort of like a lot of the legal system, and obviously I don't support like summarily executing capitalists, but
Against
when
the
we have
law.
when we have a legal system that's based around like persecuting these sort of crimes as criminal, the crimes of like wage theft, or in the Soviet Union a big thing was like a lot of landowners were destroying crops that, and rather than
Right.
distributing them. Those sort of things, like we sort of have to, at some point we have to orient ourselves around like saying, hey, this is not okay. We there has to be like some sort of a penalty for enacting uh what should be a crime, which is like actions that are leading to people's starvation in order to sow dissent to whatever economic system you don't like, because you no longer possess large amounts of institutional power. And that's like I when people choose to engage in that behavior, they should be treated as criminals. And what I think of the criminal justice system is that it should be based entirely around reformism, and that punishment based systems don't work or and are unethical, but they should still be treated to whatever extent we treat criminals in a socialist society.
Yeah, no, I broadly agree with that. But I don't think treating like wage theft as a criminal offense. Well, okay, I'll stop. Well, we could do that under capitalism too. I'll stop doing that because I do kind of
You
broadly
you
agree
really
with.
can't do that under capitalism though, because there are very legitimate reasons under capitalism why you can't, like, for example, like
Criminalize wage
the
theft.
manager that chose to like perform wage theft on you is part of, like, they're part of like a limited liability corporation. You what you do is you'd end up going to court, and you'd end up like suing the company, and you'd go through that long and like lengthy legal process, and then if you win that, which is a pretty big if, then you can act state violence on the company as an institution, but the individual who decided to do that is not really, doesn't ever really see consequences for that. And there are legitimate reasons for organizing that way in a capitalist institution, but I see that as a failure of capitalism to, like, actually encourage people to act morally.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure how to really respond to that. The thing is, I don't want to like whataboutism you all the time, especially because only
I mean, these
really look
whatabouts
on.
are important, and I don't mind answering them. Like, it's you're not going like, what about Venezuela or some shit, like, you're not doing like Charlie Kirk shit, so I'm fine with it.
Okay, so I guess so. Again, I broadly agree with your critique, your diagnosis here, but one of the things I am worried about, like for example, for a system that says it is about um, I don't want to say the popular rule, but
Like, you can say direct democracy. That's probably the most accurate sort
yeah,
of,
direct
yeah.
democracy or self sufficiency or whatever the
Self
fuck you want to call it,
governance, yeah.
self governance. Um, is that like I don't know if you if and I'm not sure if you're probably definitely not in favor.
Sorry, you cut out after you're probably definitely not in favor of.
You're definitely not in favor of like a U.S. like mass violent revolution. I'm assuming.
I think violence at some point is necessary, but it should be limited to self-defense. Like, when we see like previous groups trying to organize
Well, yeah, yeah,
non-violently, they end up being
no, for
like
sure. Like,
attacked, and at that point, you need to defend yourself, and you have
there's a
the
big
moral
difference
obligation
between
to.
like violence in the margins and like a fucking protesters fighting and a handful of riot institutionalized purges. There's
Right?
a
Yeah.
massive fucking difference there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree that some violence would be necessary. It is even justified. Uh, but I guess my opposition there is like if you look at the Bolsheviks, I believe they're only a pretty minuscule portion of the population of Russia at the time. I wouldn't be surprised if the same was true for Maoists or most other communist or socialist outright revolutions. You only really need a small portion of dedicated people to actually do a revolution. You don't need the majority of a country.
Well, you
All
you only need a like very dedicated minority to. Sorry, I'll let you go where you're going, because I have an issue with that, but I want to see where you're actually going with it first.
so yeah, I'm not sure you can justify I guess an anarchist revolution if the anarchists aren't in line with the popular will of the people.
So, oh, okay.
Because at that
So
point, you're
when you
basically claiming you know better than you know what is better for someone.
so
It's
here's the
probably
thing:
true
is
on that.
like, I don't think anarchists. I don't think the revolutions, the Bolshevik revolutions, were successful, and I don't think the great, like, the Maoist revolution in China was successful either. Um, Long term, exactly for the reason you listed, that they didn't have the support of like the vast majority of the population. Like, they were a minority of dedicated political organizers who were able to seize power, and this is a big part of my critique of Marxist Leninism, is a lot of these Marxist Leninist countries did end up succumbing to capital because they ended up creating
Yeah,
institutions that were able to
yeah,
be, yeah, corrupted in that sort of way.
that's the exact
Um,
same argument I've used against Stalinists.
right.
Jesus, Stalinists are interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there. So when talking about the USSR, I am like there are certain things that I will say like it's probably better than the Tsar. That's
Oh
that's
no,
like
of course.
that's like there are certain concessions I'll grant to the USSR. Just but there's not like long term. I
And
don't
I
see
don't.
Marxist Leninist groups being successful because they don't create the same sort of like I was saying, like in order for anarchists to be successful, we need to give people the proper incentives and institutional forces in order to self-govern, or else they will not be able to self-govern effectively. Like if we had an anarchist revolution in the United States today under the current political climate, and it was successful somehow, we wouldn't end up at anarchism. We would end up with a bunch of ethno states fighting each other on formerly U.S. soil, with
Yes.
almost none of them organized along any sort of leftist lines. So yeah, I would say that you need to, in order for there to be any sort of sustainable leftist revolution, there does need to be mass support of the people. So that criticism is correct.
Okay. Well, then I guess that kind of goes back to like the issue where
But like I want to
the
be clear
people in
here. Like
power. Hmm?
I want to be clear here when we say these things. Like I want to be absolutely certain we're not jumping between topics, right? Because when we talk about like the feasibility of anarchist theory, and we say, well, it sounds nice, but we can't really get there. That's not really a rebuttal of the theory itself. It's more of a rebuttal of the current political situation. Like if you're in favor of like either single payer healthcare or some sort of Medicare for all, or some sort of reform to our current system, but it's not an
Yeah, it's
argument.
probably not going to happen
If you were arguing
because,
with someone who said that universal healthcare was a bad idea because Trump would never pass it, that would not be like relevant to the conversation at all.
well, okay.
Yeah,
So I feel like what I'm about to say is relevant because it is kind of the argument you used against
right.
capitalism itself is because that the people in power will seek to create, institutions that promote a culture that benefits them themselves. And I think the same would apply to any cultural movement that basically for anarchism you would have the capitalists in the exact same way they'd be pushing back against capitalist reformers, um, trying to create institutions and use their power to affect culture in such a way that popular movement ever emerged.
Sorry, you were cutting out a little bit. Can you repeat that?
Essentially, for the exact same reason, capitalists create and affect culture in order to prevent reform within a capitalist framework, but also use it to stop or slow down any anarchist cultural movement
So
prior to.
your content. I just want to make sure I got this correct. Your contention is that capitalists will be use their like will use whatever force they have in order to stop any sort of revolution from occurring, and that's your contention with that.
No, it's that I don't. Well, kind of. It's that I don't think you're we need to create a culture because you okay. So as I understand it, your last point that you had made most recently was that we need to create a culture where where basically we need to create mass support for anarchism in order for it, correct?
Yeah, and by doing that, yeah, that's the short version. Yeah.
And my position is we need to create mass movements for capitalism to work. And the thing we both agree on is that the people in power will do everything they can to stop those mass movements from ever emerging. And I'm not necessarily certain how a mass movement for reformism would be more susceptible to interference than a mass movement to anarchism.
So the big thing is that the after we institute institutional reforms, the core institution still exists, right? So we still have those
Mhm.
same like we still have the same economic structure, and we still have the same political structure that encourages people's cultures to align themselves with capitalism. Like we still have the same what I consider negative behaviors incentivized under capitalism after all of the reforms have occurred. We don't necessarily see that in an anarchist system, because once like if a successful revolution occurs, then we have social and political lines organized in a way that incentivizes them to like self-perpetuate in a way that doesn't necessarily exist in a capitalist system. That would be my critique of that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of more going for viability of revolution reason argument, which I can not do if you don't want me to do it, I guess.
Sorry, I don't
You
mind. I
can
don't
feel
mind
free.
viability of revolution arguments. Like I don't mind having those. The thing I don't like is when we start talking about like the thing I don't like, and this hasn't been something you've done, but this is something I see a lot of, and I don't think people realize that they're doing it. Is we start having a conversation about like, well, this is how anarchism works in theory, and then we reach a point where I'm talking to a liberal, and we're talking about theory for a long time, and then the liberal pivots and goes, well, that sounds great, but how do we implement it? And if we follow that without like coming to some sort of like conclusion or on the first topic, then we end up like ping-ponging back and forth between how do we get there, how does it work, how do we get there, how does it work, and neither of those two topics have like significant advances in the conversation. I'm fine with talking about like how do we get there and like tactics and how like a revolution actually works. The only thing the thing I have an issue with, and this isn't something you're doing, is when that conversation is used as like a distraction from what the original topic of the conversation was. But if you want to talk about like how revolutions actually work, we can talk about that. That's not a problem.
I guess I'm just kind of curious, like what you mean by like I guess so you're talking about uh I guess essentially creating an off ramp from a more hierarchical society into more of a flat hierarchy anarchist society.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about like some examples what that off ramp would look like. One of the things I was thinking would be like, I don't know, like how in France they have laws that require workers to be on like boards of directors. Sure, so that was my imagination.
So worker
One of
interests are on the board of directors for in France, but the when it comes to like the idea isn't just to have people's interests reflected in these systems. The idea is to have active participation in these systems. So like in Vietnam, it's mandatory that every company has an employee run union. And that's the sort of behavior more so than workers having a say in the board of directors through like a representative. Workers actively working with each other through a union is something that I think is actually like really beneficial to them exercising the power, like the collective exercising their own powers to collectively organize and encouraging people to engage. Like in the United States, we have, for what little democracy I think we do have pretty strong democratic traditions. We have like people are like voting is seen as like a civic duty, even if people don't do it. That's how it's perceived culturally. And if someone came in and was like, "Hey, we're gonna," if someone came in and was blatant about, "Hey, we're gonna come in and we're gonna restrict your right to vote," that's something that we would see like incredibly strong pushback on, because this is seen as like core to like our cultural identity, the idea of being able to vote on like who the president is. And even though I have criticisms of the US democratic system, that's like a cultural reality.
right.
And because of we have that strong like cultural tradition, the legal rights are we have a much we're much more likely to protect those rights because we see them as like foundational to who we are. Similarly to if someone is like a member of a union, and they organize the union organizes along anarchist lines, they make decisions through direct democracy, and they they make decisions viewing it through the framework of establishing a flat hierarchy where everyone's needs are addressed through a direct democratic process. Then by engaging in that behavior, they are socialized in order to apply that same mindset to other areas of their life. Um, and that's sort of like it's not necessarily about their interest being represented. It's about them having like direct participation in these systems.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's not something I would even want to argue about
Yeah,
against, because like, even if I am skeptical that that would be that things like that, and I'm not entirely sure I am skeptical. I'm just not convinced that you know we could create an effective off ramp from our more hierarchical system. Uh,
sure.
even if we can't do that, changes like what you're talking about I think are good in of themselves. I'd broadly be in support of things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of anarchist. I
That
don't
seems
see
infinitely.
I don't really see anarchism as like a political theory with really like firm boundaries in the same sense as I see like Marxist Leninism or like monarchy or constitutional democracy. I see it as um a mode of analysis for looking at how we organize ourselves and a set of tools to critique those organizational systems whenever it becomes necessary. And I think that anarchism is the best set of tools available for those sorts of things. But that's something that does need to be like it's something that does need to be like taught to people in addition to them living like we need to teach people how to live in an anarchist society in order for it to work, and this is something that goes back to like early theories of like how democracy works. This is the same idea of people being like engaged democratic citizens where we need to be everyone to be educated in order to vote on things to serve their best interests. That sort of same principle applies to anarchy where yeah, in order for an anarchist state to succeed or an anarchist government to succeed, I should stop saying state, it's just habit. um,
Yeah,
in order for an anarchist government to succeed, everyone needs to be like engaged citizens who have who are well educated enough to actually participate in a meaningful way. um, and that's yeah, I think that anarchism accomplishes that goal of like that fundamental goal of democracy better than other systems do, because under anarchism and without capitalism we don't have capitalism is essentially a non-democratic force that's for we have are forced to participate in for almost all of the actions we take in our lives under our current society. And that's by because we have this like what is essentially the same. It's a dual power structure. It's outside of state control, and it exists to enforce certain cultural norms and provide certain services that could be provided through the state. Um, this dual power structure of like engaging in capitalism versus engaging in democracy sort of creates a tension where people don't necessarily feel like their democratic influence in government has any real impact because they after they take their like 1 or 2 days a year where they go vote, they then go to live out the rest of their lives in an environment where they have no say over anything that happens to them. They live under essentially, whether you think it's justified or not, it's autocratic control in the workplace. Um,
yeah.
and that
Um,
sort of tension, I think, really impedes people's ability to actually participate in democracy.
hmm. um. So I think there could be a lot of things we can do to encourage people to be more to feel more confident in democracy and the ability of the government to protect their interests against essentially corporations. One of the ideas I've really liked, and it's probably not sufficient from your point of view, but is well, the idea existed before Yang, but I think Yang calls it like democracy box or something. I don't fucking know, but it's basically like a voucher system that you can use to donate to politics. That like
Well,
because
hold on, go ahead.
so I
Sorry.
think that would go a long way to reducing, which I believe is your fundamental problem.
I would say that any sort of like system like that where people are given vouchers to donate to political campaigns isn't actually increasing their engagement in the process in the way I would like. What they're doing is they're consuming politics. They're not engaging with them. By and like you're this is a this isn't like people being encouraged to make informed decisions on how to run their lives and how to ensure the best needs of their community are met. This is people who are encouraged to um, partake in essentially consumerism of political ideologies, which I don't think engenders the same behavior that I think anarchism does. Like these aren't comparable from that specific example. There are definitely things like compulsory voting I'm sort of iffy on, and I don't think that goes far enough, but that's the sort of thing where people are like actually like engaging in institutions. Whereas donating to other people's political campaigns, you are essentially you're showing support for someone else engaging in a political institution rather than engaging in it yourself.
Hmm. That's an interesting take. Can't say I disagree with that. That's a good point. But I think it would go a long way to reducing the power corporations have over a government relative power of people.
Yeah, and I think these harm reduction measures shouldn't be outright dismissed. I just don't think that they. I so like when we talk about like harm reduction, I'm talking about things like
Yeah,
Medicare
yeah.
for all, like a
Mhm.
minimum wage, like a living minimum wage, like things like that that enable people to like. I have the same criticism of them that I've been espousing throughout this entire conversation, where like these are measures that are in the long term doomed to fail, and that they don't address the like structural inequality of capitalism in my eyes. But if they can like ease people's like daily burden of life, I'm still in support. I'm not an accelerationist. I don't believe that we should like
Yeah.
vote Donald
Or
Trump into office in order
accelerationists are
to advance the
wacky.
dialectic. No, because I think that when people, and this is maybe going a little bit too deep into into things, but when we look at people's willingness to contribute and like like actually take political stances on things, we see people are most politically engaged when they have absolutely nothing to lose, or when they feel that they can
Hmm.
engage in political activities without there being risk to their ability, like risk, direct risk to their quality of life, right? So
Oh, okay.
like if you have nothing to lose, you're going to like go out and revolt. But if you also if you feel safe in if you feel safe in things, but you also are conscious of there being problems, you're also going to try to enact political change in that scenario as well. And I think the second scenario is preferable, for pretty obvious reasons, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting um yeah, so this conversation is so freeform. We had no idea what we were going to talk about going into this. I keep
If
like
you want to like I'm down to talk whenever. Essentially, I'm always looking for content because stream. Here's the thing about streaming is you can either play a video game or you can talk about politics, and you run out of content fast when talking about politics. Because like I've tried to do political streams before without like talking to someone else, and it's really hard for me to like riff on things for like how long have we been going for? We've been going for like an hour and a half. I could not riff on things for this long. So anytime you want to,
oh yeah.
if you ever feel like you have like a specific point you want to make, or if you then or if you want to talk about like a specific thing, you're welcome to come on anytime. Just
Um
let me know. But
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't want to. I'm not trying to push you off. Just as that's like a warning, or not a warning. Sorry, fuck.
I'm not trying to push you off. Here's a
Yeah.
fucking warning you.
Yeah, I just it's just a notice that if there's ever anything you want to like you talk about or you want to like prepare more, then I'm down for that.
Yeah, okay. That'll be good to keep in mind. And just as a comment, and I know you didn't say I we had talked earlier about how talk about,
Sorry, you're cutting out again.
well, you had spoken earlier about how people will try and separate theory and viability.
Sorry. Okay, I want to make sure I got it. You're saying I had spoken earlier about how people try to separate theory and viability. Is that because I'm not sure if you're cutting out or just have big
Yeah,
gaps.
no, that's
Okay.
from I don't know my position from I guess because I think like I'm broadly speaking for mental. So at least to me, theory and viability and how we those are all almost the same thing. Not exactly, but very.
Yeah, no, there's definitely intersections between those things, and they're related. Again, just to be very clear about it, it's a specific framing of the conversation I don't like, where people
Oh yeah,
will. It's
I
not
know.
about like if you can like relate these two things, and I don't mind talking about them in relation to each other. The issue I have is when we're talking about like specifically like how would a factory work in anarchism, and then we talk about that for a while, and then they pivot to how do we get from our current situation to anarchism, and we talk about that for a while, and
And
then
then they
they
bounce
get to a certain point and they go like, but how would a factory work?
back.
and, and that's the sort of thing that I'm trying to avoid, is like that sort of ping pong where nothing actually gets discussed.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I guess this is kind of how I found it, but it's also self. So how do I suppose I guess you could call them managerial? Even I guess. Okay. So when you're distributing resources on a large, not like
So how would a
distributing resources
public bathroom work?
within a community, I can under, but I can understand how people within a community, certain geographic, they'll be able to cooperate, do the.
Sorry, you're still cutting out really badly. I can't really.
Okay, actually, let me try and move from Discord to Discord on my phone to Discord on.
Yeah, that might be better. What's the topic? The topic is basically whatever. We're talking about. I'm talking to my friend Sean, and we're talking about currently. Um, I think Sean's about to make a point of how do we guarantee that people treat each other equitably across communities in anarchism, but it's really just a big conversation of like anarchist theory versus liberalism.
So I guess where do the economists? What happens to the economists in anarchy? What do we do?
Well,
Do we just be sad?
I think economists actually have a pretty actually, because here's one thing that markets are really great at. Markets are great. Huh? Was that? I think that was your phone buzzing. It sounded like you going, "Oh, oh."
Yeah, it was.
I was like, but I think so. Here's one thing that I won't deny markets are absolutely great at. Markets are great for exceedingly quickly determining demand for a product based on prices. I don't think that our entire economy should be based on that, because I don't think that's important enough to base our entire economy around. But it's something they're good at. So I think the primary role of economists under any sort of like communist system would be to, especially when you're talking about like making like production of goods between communities rather than within a given community, we need to have some way of assessing the needs and wants of different communities, and we'd need to like actually like do in-depth studies on these things rather than just putting it on the market at a given price and letting these things like we'd want to produce to demand, not produce as much as possible and then induce an artificial demand through advertising and other means. And that sort of work is like really detailed economic work that I think we would absolutely need economists to help us with that. Sorry, are you there right now? Oh. Need to drag you back in. Okay, sorry. How much of that did you hear?
Okay, there you go.
Wow, that actually sounds much better.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, last thing I heard before I Discord booted me from the phone was markets are exceedingly good at doing something very quickly.
Okay. Yeah, markets are exceedingly good at like measuring what the demand for a different given good is very quickly. That's probably what they're best at. And under like so like when we alter our production away from a market based system, I think the primary thing that economists would be looking for is measuring demand for different goods, both in terms of like what different communities need and what they want, and finding ways to measure that so that we can produce enough to meet that demand without waste and without inducing artificial demand through advertising. And that's a very important job that I think we'd absolutely need economists for.
All right. So as much as I feel I wrongly, because I am not an economist,
Yeah,
feel like that answer, that sounds like hierarchy, like, because then you have one person just, or at least I guess maybe it would be voted on or something eventually, but you have people at least developing proposals for how resources are distributed between communities or between factories, stuff like that, and that gives this one person a lot of power.
Sure, but this is something where like you could say that anyone performing any sort of labor is a hierarchy, because like the person working at the shovel plant has the capacity to stop making shovels, and by doing so they could disrupt the entire agricultural industry by this is a form of labor just like any other, in my eyes, where you have an incentive to work in the public interest rather than your own, and the way these decisions would be made wouldn't be the economist does their studies and then unilaterally makes the decisions. We could have some sort of like democratic process going on as well. The job of the economist isn't to make decisions about how much is produced. The job of the economist would be to, and I this is just an idea. This isn't like for sure how things will turn out. But
yeah, neither of us are actual experts on anything we're talking about.
Yeah, what I'd say is like like economists would be their job would be to like produce models that could estimate demand and go out and do research to support these models, and then we can use these models to determine our production targets for whatever anarchist production is occurring, so that we can produce exactly to demand.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Well,
I don't think but like they're not the ones making the actual like they're not proclaiming to others that, oh, you are going to do this in order to meet our targets. They're just saying like, okay, here's how much we need via this model in order to like actually sustain the economy. Now let's talk about how we're going to meet these targets, and then we can, after we meet them, we'll have data about like what do we overproduce on, what do we underproduce on, and we can use that data to further refine the model. What kind of liberal is this nerd? How are you doing, Panda?
I'm a bad liberal, I guess. I don't know. I'm not really a liberal. I don't even know what the fuck I am. I'm a revolutionary incrementalist. That's what I am. I like it with my contradictions of political ideology. Well, I mean, I guess you've broadly convinced me that if the bandwagon gets large enough, I will hop on the anarchist bandwagon. But I'm not sure I'd be pushing it at this point in time.
That's fair. And I mean, if we do enact all of these social democratic reforms that fix everyone's quality of life in the first world and the third world, but we still have capitalism, but it doesn't matter, then I'm down for that. But I don't think that's realistic. So,
I guess.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it seems like we don't actually disagree much there. I mean, about a few things, but we're broadly in agreement.
I think feasibility is the biggest disagreement, and I think you're right. And you're like, anarchism is a long-term project. It's not something that's ever going. It's not something that the biggest critique of anarchism, the critique of anarchism that I think is most valid is it's impossible to like alter culture in the way that we can produce a sustainable leftist movement in the time we have left on Earth before climate change. So we're all fucked no matter what we do. That's the critique of anarchism. I think is the most teeth to it. But
Yeah.
given the time necessary, I think anarchism is the solution to a lot of the problems I see in capitalism, and I think it's the only real solution that can produce long-term results.
Hey, I think we just need to make an artificial superintelligence god emperor.
Oh my god, no. You played System Shock too, right?
No, I have not.
Oh.
But I read a lot of Slate Star. I don't even read a lot, but I read Slate Star Codex, so that's all you need to know.
That's my opinion. Ryan, the climate change one is yours? Yeah, I mean, that's... I don't know. I choose to be optimistic about climate change because the alternative is fatalism in a way that I really don't think is productive.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
that obviously
climate change
means
fatalism is almost more annoying than climate change nihilism.
Isn't that a criticism of having any political aspirations? It is, and I think it's a very, very valid criticism of having political aspirations. And it's one that the only real answer I have to it is, well, we need to try anyway. That's not trying isn't going to do anything. But you're right.
Sorry.
It is a criticism of any political aspiration whatsoever.
What was he talking about? What criticism?
Climate.
Like it might not work? Oh, climate. Okay.
Yeah, climate.
Yeah, no. Facadism. I don't know. I'd always read that as podasm.
Posadism will save us. Thank you for the follow, by the way, Feel My Puddle. So yeah, Posadism is, I don't know much about it, but
that's like the nuclear one, right? Like we can create a post-nuclear communist utopia or something.
Yeah, it's got something to do with aliens and something to do with dolphins. I don't know the details.
Yeah, there's something that on the last podcast on the left, but accelerationism is really the best philosophy, guys.
Yeah. I'd call it more of a tactic than a philosophy, but for the meme, I'll agree.
God. Okay, so I guess you just want to turn this into a Q&A, because this isn't really a real debate, at least not anymore.
Yeah, I don't mind.
I think we've reached the natural
a Q&A between chat and us, or Q&A between you and me. I don't care either way.
Yeah. Well, I have a few questions, and I like being in chat because it makes me feel special. But I don't care if.
What I mean is, like, are we answering questions from the Twitch chat, or do you have questions?
I have a couple of questions. Yeah. I kind of forgot them already, but I did have questions.
Alrighty. Well, while you remember them, does anyone in chat want to have any hot takes that they want to drop about? Yeah. Panda, I did see that you wanted to get in the call. I do kind of want to keep it at 2 people right now, but you can come on in a little bit, probably.
Yeah, probably. I haven't eaten yet all day, so I'll probably need to go make food.
Also, Sean is my friend, so please don't be mean, even though Sean is wrong.
No, you can be mean. It gets me hard. Shit, I had a good question, but I forgot it, and this fucking annoys me. There was a question about anarchism. God, what? Whatever.
Hot take: eliminate all public restrooms. Peeing is gross. Do it at home. You ever been on a road trip, Ryan?
God damn it, you got me, Ryan.
Reverse psychology, do you? I wanted that. Oh my god.
This is really annoying. I hate this.
Yeah.
Fuck.
The left should be against the Hong Kong protests.
Ooh.
Maybe. Certain elements of the Hong Kong so the Hong Kong protests, like a lot of there are a lot of like liberals among the Hong Kong protests, and the Hong Kong protests are like in response to some like extradition law that only really affects like wealthy people in Hong Kong. And there have been like sightings of like people like flying American and UK flags and as much as I'm not a big fan of the People's Republic of China, I'm also not a fan of foreign interventionism. So I can see the desire to not want to support them. However, even though those elements to the movement are there, there are leftist movements within the Hong Kong protests as well that I
Can
think
I say,
are worth supporting, even if the movement as a whole is mostly spontaneous and doesn't really have a coherent political ideology. I'll take anything as a. I'll always support leftist movements and who are taking advantage of greater political distress in order to try to advance their causes, even if they're not the majority of the cause. So you can support specific causes within the group without supporting it completely uncritically as a whole.
yeah,
What's wrong with China? How about China banning students from reading Mao and Marx? That's a big one. For a supposedly communist country. They have a lot of billionaires, and they don't really have a lot of communism, and they don't really seem to be keen.
It's basically state capitalism. It's not communist.
Yeah, it's
I mean, you can debate like if state capitalism is precisely the right word, but it's definitely China's definitely not socialist.
It's definitely not. I don't really. I really don't. I don't think China is like out and out evil, because I don't think a lot of what China does is any worse than what other countries do. But they definitely. I'm definitely not a supporter of China.
Speaking of Hong Kong, its governmental
EJ said that it
structure
appears that the UK
fucking
and US
wacky.
flag waivers are not part of the main protests and are shit stirrers. Yeah, I saw that video as well. I do. I mean, I haven't really. That seems probable to me. And when you look at like any sort of like mass political demonstration, especially spontaneous ones like the ones in Hong Kong, there are always gonna be cops in the movement, and it doesn't discredit the movement as a whole that there are cops trying to like supersede certain elements of it. Like that's a pretty universal. Cops trying to infiltrate political movements activist movements is pretty much universal among activist movements. So
Well, do you know that Hong Kong, it has its legislature has like seats for corporation or corporate interests, like legitimate, like actual.
Oh yeah, no.
Power.
As fucked up as I think, even though I think China is pretty fucked up, Hong Kong is absolutely the worst. I don't support the Hong Kong government. The only thing I support in the Hong Kong the only thing I support in the Hong Kong protests are whatever leftist movements are a part of those protests. No matter how marginal they are. I don't know, and I don't think I have access to information to know how prevalent like actual leftist discourse is within the movement, and like as compared to the rest of it. But I don't know that, but I do know that there are some leftists within there, and no matter how few they are, those are the people I support. Every other side of it can go eat it.
Well, I'm kind of out of things to say right now, so
yeah. If you want to hop off, that's fine. If you want to come back on after, that's also fine. Panda, do you have any hot takes to deliver about Hong Kong? Do you want to come on? Like Kenshi? No, thanks.
Oh, I have a hot take. I have a really spicy take.
I think dogs should vote. Is that your hot take?
The U.S. is the least evil imperial power.
Ooh, that is a hot take.
Or even hegemonic power in history.
In history, if you're comparing it to like Rome and like the British Empire, potentially, maybe. I don't like comparing evils and saying this evil is more evil than the other.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And I don't think that take is like.
Okay, let me refine that take.
Right.
It was better that the U.S. won the Cold War as opposed to Soviet Russia.
I would say Russia that could have,
and to some extent that justifies U.S. foreign interference.
Absolutely not. No, current U.S. interference during the Cold War was not justified, and U.S. interference today is absolutely not justified. That I'll firmly disagree with you on. I'm not sure how I feel about the Cold War because I'm not sure how I feel like if we're revising history for the Soviet Union to have been the ones to win the Cold War, then by necessity that would mean that the Soviet Union would have been a better iteration of the Soviet Union than the one we had, right?
That's true.
So that sort of speculation is something I'm not really.
But I mean, I don't know. I think it's entirely possible the Soviets could have won the Cold War if the U.S. fucked up more.
But U.S. intervention to prevent the spread of communism is not justifiable. The U.S. war in Vietnam wasn't justifiable. The U.S. overthrowing democratically elected leaders in order to appoint fascists absolutely was not justifiable. I don't see how you can say any of the U.S.'s history of intervention has been justifiable, with maybe the exception of World War II. But even then, the U.S. involvement, even though they were fighting a fascist regime, it wasn't done out of a legitimate interest in fighting fascism. So I don't see that makes it very difficult for me to say that.
I don't actually believe that the justifications were justified, but the interference was justified. That was just a spicy take, but to some extent, I do think that
one of the major organizers.
It's hard to know how shit will shake out when you try to interfere with things, which is probably a reason not to do it, but doesn't always have to be bad intentions or whatever.
Well, the U.S.'s stated intentions were pretty bad. It wasn't an issue of intervention went outside of U.S. control. The U.S.'s stated intervention was to prevent communism and promote U.S. business interests at all costs, and that's exactly what they did. Whenever any country like started to implement any sort of like very mild socialist reform, what they would do is they would sanction the hell out of the country. They'd use the economic crisis from the sanctions as a justification for intervention, and they would go in and they would install someone like Pinochet or
and then they'd say the economic catastrophe and the rise of the dictator was proof.
And then it's I don't think there's any situation in which that can be in any way seen as a moral option or even as the lesser of two evils. I that would be a very, very hard sell for me.
Okay.
One of the major organizers in the Hong Kong is a leftist political party named Demosisto. I don't know, fucking know. They're anti-Beijing, anti-US, and anti-UK. Panda, if you want to come and voice and talk about that, that's true. I just don't know much about it. And
see you guys.
Personally, you're going? If you want to stay and talk to Panda about Hong Kong, that's fine. But if you got to go, that's fine.
Yeah, I just mute